All right, so this video is going to be a very quick overview of how to use Flexbox to style your layout when you're building a website. All right, like when it comes to building a website and writing the CSS code to get your layout to where you want things to be, Flexbox is going to be your best friend, right? Like Flexbox is one of the most common ways that people build their layouts using CSS. All right. So, and I have a couple cheat sheets up here that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to include the links to these cheat sheets just to help you out. All right. Now, here you see that I have this div that has 3 p tags in it, and I just used this CSS to just give us like a quick visual of what these elements look like. All right. So the default display property of most elements in CSS is block, and block is when elements just stack on top of each other. Like you see here, right? You see how all of these p tags are just like on top of each other. But when it comes to doing your layout, most of the time, you are going to have items that you want to be side by side, right? Like most of your layout is going to have stuff side by side. So how do you do that? Well, you have to change the display property, because anytime that you do display block, that means that that element takes up the whole block. It takes up the whole row it's in, meaning that there's no room for anything next to it, right? And that's why I did this visual here, because you can see that this p tag is taking up the whole row, all right? But let's quickly kind of talk about Flexbox. So Flexbox has certain CSS properties that you can use to help you style your layout. But one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that some of those CSS properties can only be applied to the container element. What is a container element? A container element is any element that contains another element. All right, like that's it. A container element is any element that contains another element. So if you have a div and there's other elements inside of it, that div is the container element. So here in my example, let me come here. This div is a container because it literally contains other elements. Is this p tag a container? If you're watching this video, that means you're interested in learning to code and making a career switch to becoming a software engineer. And that's exactly what I did. My name is TJ Oyeniyi, and I'm a self-taught software engineer that still works as a software engineer while teaching complete beginners like yourself how to code and help them to get jobs as software engineers by working with them as their mentor. To learn more about working with me as your mentor, check out my coding bootcamp, Roots Technology. I'll put the link in the description below as well. No, I mean, does it contain another element inside of it? No, but it could, right? Like if I put a span tag in here, now is this p tag a container element? Yeah. Now, because the p tag contains another element. So, you know, like that's how you define container element or not. All right. If an element contains another element, it is a container element. All right, let me just get up out of there. So anytime that you want to use Flexbox, the first thing that you have to do is you have to set the display property to flex or inline flex, right? So you see here, display, you have to change the display property because by default, the display property for most elements is block. That's why, like we talked about before, that's why things are stacked. But when you want things side by side, you're going to set the display to flex. Now, where do we set that? You see, this display property is to be set on the container element. Now, real quick, this second cheat sheet gives you like a quick visual of all of these rules, you know, of all of these properties. And I like using this a lot better, but we'll switch back and forth. But you first have to change the display, and you have to make the container a flex container. All right. And that's going to automatically move things side by side. All right. So here, let's say that we go back to my example and my container is the div, right? So I'm going to set the display to flex. Boom. You see that? That automatically just put things side by side for us. All right. Just by us doing that. Most of the time, that's what you'll be doing, you know, in terms of your actual layout. All right. And if we go back to this cheat sheet here, yeah, to this second one, if let's say that I want those p elements to have some space between them, right? I will use the justified content. Remember, this justified content is on the container element. This is, you would apply this to the container, right? And if you kind of think about the CSS property, it's called justified content, right? So it's basically, hey, we want to do something to the content inside of this container, right? You see justified content, and these are all of your different options, and you can get a visual of that here, right? So let's say that I want to center all the content, right? I would just add the CSS property, justify content center, to the CSS rule for that container. So if you click on this, I'm going to include a link to this cheat sheet. I really like this cheat sheet. But if you click on this, it's going to copy it for you. You see how I click on encode, it's copied to your clipboard. Anyways, and then I come here and I paste, and boom, you see that? It now moved everything to the center. If you're learning a lot in this video, keep in mind, this is what learning to code with me as your mentor is like. Anytime you get stuck and you need help, you can schedule a Zoom call with me where we work one-on-one together on an issue like this, or you can just email me and I'll get back to you that way. But having a mentor there to guide you and ask questions to is the best way to speed up your coding journey so that you're not wasting time being stuck or working on things that don't matter. So if you're ready to start your coding journey and become a software engineer, come join me in my coding bootcamp at www.rootstechnology.info. If I want a space between it, come here, I paste, boom, right? Like, so you are going to be using this CSS property a lot when it comes to you getting like your layout set. So get familiar with this, and remember, the first thing you have to do is set the display property to flex or inline flex, right? Like, you have to change the display of the container from block to make it a flex container. And then you can start playing around with these other CSS properties and rules, because all of these properties can only be used on a flex container. They can't be used on a container element that has a display property or value of block. They can't be used on a block level element. The container has to be a flex container for you to use this, right? And these rules down here apply. These rules, these CSS properties, these Flexbox CSS properties, these can only be applied to the children, or these can be applied specifically to the items inside of the container. So here, let's say that we want to change the size, change the flex basis, right? You see, instead of putting that rule here in the div on the container element, we can target the P tag itself, because the P tag is the children, right? The children is inside of the container. So if I paste, you see that? That now applies that CSS rule to that. If I change this from 50 to 5%, boom, right? 25, boom. All right, so, take a look at this cheat sheet, and remember, this is letting you know that these CSS properties below can only be applied to the children, and these up top can only be applied to the container element. All right, and this cheat sheet here has a bit more reading in terms of just helping you to better understand Flexbox. But I hope that this quick overview, kind of really just shows you like the basics that you need, right? Which is to first change the display of the container element to make it a flex container. And once you do that, just make sure that you are using the right CSS rules on the right elements, right? Like some of the rules can only be applied to the container, and the other rules can only be applied to the items, to the children inside of the container. All right, that's it. Let me tell you how learning to code changed my life. I went from making $37,000 a year and living paycheck to paycheck to my first job as a software engineer paid me $75,000 a year. That's almost double what I was making before. So now I don't have to fly Spirit Airlines all the time anymore, and I can actually afford a real vacation. And since I change jobs every 1 to 2 years, I started making 6 figures my 3rd year as a software engineer. That's what this career change can do for you. Now I have the skills to learn anything technical and get a job in a lot of different roles and industries because of my technical skills. So don't waste time putting off learning to code if you know you're interested in making a career change. Get started now so you can be ready to start applying to jobs soon. Come learn to code with me as your mentor at rootstechnology.info.